Hi, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everybody. And welcome to another chef stream. We're streaming on Twitch and YouTube today, which is quite nice. Got a bit of variety, which is always good. Get the housekeeping out of the way first of all. If you're not following us on Twitter, you can just join us on Twitter at twitter.com/chef. And if you haven't signed up for ChefConf, what you're going to do is www.chef.io/ChefConf. We're going to have a little bit of a preview of one of the talks, or parts of one of the talks today from Sous-Chefs, which should be really interesting. Jason and I are presenting at ChefConf, and there's some really cool stuff you might want to see there. And if you're not already on the Chef Community Slack, you can go to community-slack.chef.io and join us on there. We'll be going over a little bit of Sous-Chefs today and what they are and who they are and how to contact them. You'll notice there's a room on the community Slack called #Sous-Chefs, and if you've got any more questions about any of the stuff we talk about here today, you can just join them on there, and they will probably answer some of your questions. We may not answer all of them, but we're always open to a nice good conversation. And without further ado, I will introduce today's villain, which is Jason Field, who is an SRE practice lead at ECS. Hi, Jason. What else do you do? Do you want to give us a bit more introduction at all?
Yeah, so in the chef community, I'm on the board for Sous-Chefs. So as part of that, I'm sort of doing some of the admin tasks. But if we talk about what Sous-Chefs themselves are, so we're an organisation that's existed for a number of years, primarily focused around the chef infra product. And we exist because we found a problem in sort of GitHub and chef cookbooks. They'd be written really well, maybe by you, maybe by me, maybe by somebody else. And then eventually that person would no longer be working with chef. They might move to another job. They might do something else. And these cookbooks got in a state where they weren't being released. And people wanted them released. They wanted new features. So Sous-Chefs was born out of that. So we're a place where all these cookbooks can exist. And therefore, they can always be released. And we're open to anybody. Come along, collaborate, raise issues, help us out. Our aim is not to be the gatekeepers of these cookbooks, but just to be a place where they can always be updated and always released. So that's the priority for us.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So some of these cookbooks are owned by used to be owned by some fairly big players and alternative sort of communities to Sous-Chefs. There was Red Guide a few years ago, which kind of sadly sort of gone a bit quiet recently. However, it's all kind of folded in these days into Sous-Chefs, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, I'd say, in the last year. I don't know how many new cookbooks we've got, but I'll say this. It feels like every week there's at least one or two turning up. And there's obviously some challenges at scale when you're receiving new code this quickly and also wanting to enforce certain common standards just so that whatever cookbook you're working on, it's a similar story.
Yeah. So I guess we could go into sort of good settings for GitHub, or would you like to go into Terraform and that kind of standard files first? Which would you like to jump into?
Jump into GitHub, because I don't think that's much of a Sous-Chef specific thing. That's very much a what's GitHub got to offer that, let's be fair, is in the settings, and we've not looked at them since we've created our last repository because we all forget.
Yeah.
So if we have a quick think about it, what makes a good repository for us? And what are repositories about? They're about enabling people to share code and work collaboratively, and also to ensure that the code that we're merging into our mainline branches is of sufficient quality that we don't need to worry and we can release it to production. That's the root reasons for collaborative tools like Git. So if we start talking at a very basic level, the first thing I always like to do in a GitHub repository is to go down and turn on the automatically delete head branches button.
Cool. So do you want me to share my screen?
Oh yes, if you could, Dan, that'd be great.
Yeah, let's share a Chrome tab. I'm going to use the Java cookbook as an example because every time I type in github.com, it's my default place to go to. So I'll just jump into settings here. So
yeah, so if you scroll right to the bottom there, there you go. So automatically delete head branches. It's just the bottom tick box we've got there. So to me, this is that one thing that has saved me so much headache. How many times have we all gone into a repository that's been worked on for years and people have forgot to delete branches over time? I remember seeing one recently that had 1,000+ branches left behind in it. And therefore, it's a lot of headache or a lot of toil to go and clean it all up. This just says, hey, if we've said it's good enough to merge, we'll delete the branch once it's been merged. There are some ways you can set some rules around this stuff to keep, say, if you're working on a dev release branching strategy. But at the core level, this is a nice way of saying, hey, my feature branch, just delete it when I merge because I'm going to forget.
Yeah. So one above that, actually, one I personally really like, that's really good for long pull requests, or let's say you've got a test suite that takes an hour or two to merge. So there's allow auto merge. It's a pretty new feature. So that allows you to say as soon as someone approves this and the tests pass, it will then merge as soon as it's done. If it won't merge, if all the checks fail, also if you've got required checks. Let's say you've got an integration test suite called Macros, and that needs to pass. If that then does pass, and it's one of the required checks, and auto merges on, as soon as that's done, it's then merged into main. So, like the long and the short of that one is it lets you not have to come back an hour and a half later and wait for your pull request to build basically, which is really nice.
Yeah,
that's probably saved me hours on end.
I really like that. I'm just waiting for GitHub to release the API so that we can get it in Terraform because I'm lazy. But we'll come on to Terraform in a little bit rather than jumping ahead here. The next thing, I guess, is on the merge button. We are opinionated as to what type of merging we want to use. But my recommendation is that all orgs should try to standardize on a type of merging and have an opinion there. I personally like Squash because it just closes it all down into one nice commit. And if I need to roll back out that feature, I just need to take out that one commit rather than trying to work out where is the previous commit. It's not saying it's impossible. It's just a personal preference here.
Yeah, again, that's also my personal preference, isn't it? It's quite nice. The merge commits, I think quite a few people really like merge commits. I'm not in the merge commit camp. I quite like linear history, and I don't like the merge commit as a commit thing there. I just as soon as it's merged in, you just get a new commit onto the main branch, which is very nice. And I guess that might be the next one to go. Is we can segue into main versus master branches maybe.
Yeah.
Where we're
it's under the branches option.
So the Sous-Chefs have recently migrated to the main branch, haven't you?
Yes, so we moved everything over to mainline after, in all honesty, it being on the backlog for way too long. It was something that we've been wanting to do for a while, but it was always trying not to break anybody who's pointing directly at the master branch.
Yeah, I think we still found one, maybe two people who are pointing at master. Spoilers, don't ever do that. If you're pointing at a branch on GitHub, you're just going to have a bad day because if you're pointing at a master branch or a main branch, or yeah, even a main branch these days, you're not pointing at a specific point in time. So let's say we merge a bad commit and
break everything.
We can break your production pretty easily that way.
Let's put it
as good as tests are, they're not fully exhaustive most of the time.
We may update main with breaking changes for a major release, and if you're pointed at main, you may not be able to continue to run your code because you're pointed at a newer version of the code than what you support. This is where semantic versioning and some of the nice features of metadata and policy files come in to say, hey, let's say we're going from version 3 to version 4. Anything version 3 is acceptable, but version 4 I can't have. Well, there's a nice feature inside these. I can never remember what it's called, Dan. The constraint one.
Yeah.
I know what it looks like, but we'll get that put up on the notes, no doubt, for this call.
Yeah. Actually, one thing we haven't mentioned, we kind of touched on, is the branch protection rules.
Yeah, these I think are just good sanity things to have for any branches that you care for. So one of the good ones here we normally do at the very top, Dan, we'll start with the simple one, is we always require a pull request review. So to me, Git is all about collaborativeness, and I might think I'm writing the best code in the world, but I'd like somebody else to come along and check that my logic makes sense, or that there's not something I didn't know that I didn't know. When I started out in Ruby, I used to do if not, where then I found out about various other things within the Ruby syntax that fit those use cases better. And without the reviews, I may not have learnt them, or I may have been doing it wrong not wrong, but not at best practice for a number of years. So that's why I like the reviews. They help us to upskill members of the community as well. Hey, are you aware of this helper? Hey, if you're doing a property, you know there's a validation rule, so you now don't have to write the code underneath to go and check if it's set. Various little tricks that, let's be fair, in amongst all the release notes of Chef, we're not all going to remember everything, but if we're reviewing it, we normally capture and can cover 90% of it.
Yeah.
The one underneath that we do like but isn't turned on at the moment is code owners. Code owners is a sort of personal favorite of mine. It's saying that this code must be reviewed by somebody within the code owners file. The code owners file within GitHub allows us to specify a number of rules. So it may be a group, it may be a person that owns the entire repository. But we may also say that, hey, anything within the .github workflows folder, that's something that we... Everything okay?
Reshare. I've got that open now.
Yeah. So here you will see an asterisk. So the asterisk means everything, but we can also specify rules based on paths. So we may say that there's a group that review all CI/CD changes just to make sure they're in line with our standards. We don't, but we could do that. And we could have a different one for documentation if we had a docs team. So it's giving us that ability for the right people to be tagged to review on each pull request, and that I, as a person raising a pull request, don't need to know who should be reviewing what. That it will just automatically be added.
So the reason when we haven't got code owners open is we've actually recently changed. This is probably another scalability thing, isn't it? So what we used to have as Sous-Chefs was a set of people who are really interested in the Java cookbook, and they would be the maintainers for the Java cookbook, and then you'd have a set of maintainers for basically every single cookbook, which works if you've got a small number of cookbooks and a large number of people. Let's say, the Java cookbook and then the line cookbook, you may have a separate bunch of people who are interested in both of those two things. When you have over 100 cookbooks and 50 maintainers, you probably don't need that anymore. And as Jason said earlier on, am I right in thinking that when you've got a big pool of people to pull from and actually ping, you're more likely to get a review from more than just John every time or Dave every time?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And you can set some special routing rules, I believe, on who gets the reviews and how it's done. But for us, we just let it ping everybody, because
so
if you're interested, you're interested. If you're not, you're not for us. But again, yeah. Do you want to show them the round robin then, Dan?
Yeah, let me just find it. There's the
yeah. The other one that, while Dan's not got it, the next tick box under code owners is restrict who can dismiss pull request reviews. We don't worry about that. We trust everybody. If you're going to dismiss somebody's review, that's fine. It's in the history. We'll be able to see it.
So if you go to, I'll go back a few pages. So it's, if you get to your repositories and then teams, and then if you click on the team you want to have a look at, and then you go to settings, and then there's a bunch of really nice ones here. The top ones, the general, so name and visibility, that kind of stuff. And if there's a parent team, all good. Code review assignment, we can do enable automatic assignments. So if you select the maintainers group, it won't ping everyone from the assigners group. You can then say, hey, pick number 1 and 5. So if I just pick, I want 2 reviewers as a round robin, so we'll just pick number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 every time it goes, or we can load balance. So across the entire team, just so one person doesn't get spammed with all the reviews every time, which is really nice.
If we think outside of Sous-Chefs and as part of an organization, we know that there's normally tends to be 1 or 2 people who end up doing all the reviews because they've got the time. With this, you can set it.
Sous-Chefs, it's about 3 of us.
Yeah, but with this kind of setting, we can then go and say, hey, now we're going to be distributing this throughout the team. And if you get a pull request review that you're not confident on, pull in one of the people who does all the reviews, get them to go through it with you, because they're going to help teach you what they're looking for and upskill you at the same time. To me, that's what the pull requests are about. It's collaboration, it's upskilling. The other one I like is never assign to certain team members.
Yes,
because then I can have a very, very quiet inbox.
You can also have that as if you've got a bot in here, or you know that someone's never going to reply because they're on holiday or something, you can just remove them from the round robin, which is really, really nice. Also, again, one of those things that's been released within the last 6 months, really quietly in the background. It's beautiful and it works. I've used that in previous teams, which is really, really nice. Let me just stop sharing for a second. I think that's probably most of the settings that we want to talk about for now, maybe.
I'd like to go to the
barrage of settings there, wasn't it, really?
There's a couple settings I would like to touch on before we wrap up in there. So if we head back into branch protection, there's status checks. Good old favorite status checks.
So if I go to branch protection rules and then scroll.
So status checks, as we all know, these are the callbacks that the CI systems do into our pull requests. You'll normally see them as the green tick or the red cross. So by requiring status checks to pass, we can then say which ones are truly important to us. So maybe we say that, hey, we don't use it, but I've seen on some repository, there's a spell check one that doesn't always pass because new words, new coding terms are being added. Well, if that doesn't pass, it's probably good if we go and fix it, but we're not going to block the merge on it. But for us, there's a pile of status checks that we truly care about that you can see here. So these are some of our release systems, along with our linters and our integration tests. So you'll see
one of them we don't require is Markdown.
MDL. You'll think of Dan, so look at second from bottom.
This is the links one. I mean,
yes.
Repository. Yeah, so the links one is fine and it's pretty good unless you're adding a new link to a new document that doesn't yet exist. So, of course, it's trying to check for a document existing that doesn't yet exist because you're just adding the content. So you've got to add the content for the document and then link to the document as 2 separate pull requests for it to work, which, as a contributor, is a bit frustrating So we don't require that one.
Yeah, I would say I normally leave these things down to the people doing the reviews. Most people are sensible. If they see something failing, they go and ask why and they figure it out. And if they think it's failing for a reason that doesn't affect them, they'll just put a comment on it and say, hey, this is failing, but it's actually fine. And it will pass once it's merged into main. The other thing in here, always useful, require branch to be up to date before merging, because we don't want to be dealing with weird merge conflicts at later stages in time.
Yeah, so if you're testing on old code, so let's say you branched on Tuesday and you made your changes, but then someone on Wednesday merged to main and merged a change that affected your code, you're still testing on Tuesday's change unless you rebase. So there's a nice button in GitHub these days to just update your branch.
And because of squash merges, we will never see that you did that in the long-term history, so we don't have to worry, which is always nice. The only other tick box in here that's always fun is include administrators. If you tick it, you will find it magically becomes unticked in time. Because as admins, we are not always great at following the rules that we set. We aim to do well, but once in a while you need to get something out. You need to bypass the settings because there is a production issue, or there's just a failing build that we're going to look at in another ticket, but the value of this feature is so great that failing build, we know it's failing for a different reason, and it's nothing to do with this feature. I think a common one we might see once in a while is where the checksums have changed on files we're downloading, and it's like, we want to get this fixed, but let's just get this feature out and then we'll fix it quickly in another PR, because we don't want to block our contributors for too long. Not something we do often, but really useful.
That's pretty cool.
I think that's really it for the settings. The only other tab I'd advise people to have a nose in is security and analysis. So Depender-bot's got a lot more smarts in it nowadays and can sort of help you with a lot of your dependencies. So take a look in there and do some research on Depender-bot, because it can save you a lot of manual work. I'm not going to go totally into that right now, though.
One thing we haven't done is enable code scanning, but we don't need to do that today. There's some really interesting code scanners we can enable on the on GitHub Actions, and this is kind of digs it a bit further into like GitHub being a marketplace and enabling apps to use your code and scan your code, and it's kind of really come of age in the last year or so, really.
Yeah, they've added a lot more features in recent time. I'm not going to sit here and pretend there weren't some stability issues with some of those features, but they seem to have resolved a lot of the stability side of things recently. Although now I've said that, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm not going to mention runners today because that's a GitHub specific thing. I think that's probably it. As far as the GitHub action stuff, sorry, the GitHub settings goes. And then also, as a result, we've gone through the Sous-Chefs specific settings, I guess, there as well. So it's quite nice. How do you how do those settings come about? Because you have like 100+ repos, almost 200 repos these days. A quick look at these. How many we got?
We're running 169.
So I'm assuming these are not hand built.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm sat there every night going through the tick boxes. No, I don't have patience to do anything by hand. So I waste more time writing code than I will actually doing it by hand. But if we're talking about GitHub, I like to use Terraform. So we all think of Terraform. What's it for? It's for building Azure, AWS, GCP. It's for building my infrastructure. Well, actually, Terraform has a provider for GitHub. So we can control the repositories that way as well. So we have a repository called Terraform GitHub repository. When you get a second, Dan, if you could share it, I think it would be useful.
I was just waiting for you to tell me which one to open.
So this is something we rebuilt recently. So if we talk about a bit of history here, the Sous-Chefs org has been managed by Terraform for a long time. we did hit a scaling limit on the Terraform runs. Something about having a lot of webhooks in hundreds of repositories causes it to time out a little bit, I believe.
Did we work out that it was something like 900 webhooks?
It's a small number like that. Yeah, it was around 1,000 mark.
Yeah, it was pretty nasty.
Yeah.
And,
so
yeah,
we split that up recently. That's the key thing. So from one repository, which would manage Augur membership, repositories, and adding the GitHub webhooks, we've split that into the 3 parts. So we've got one which deals with Augur membership and users. We're not probably going to look in that too much right now. The key one is this one here, is the repository. This is how we're doing all those GitHub settings. So what we have done is we've done a loop over repository types. So we've been very opinionated as to how things should be, because we understand what a cookbook repository should look like, what the settings should be. So we've only allowed ourselves to have 4 different types of repository. The majority of them are cookbook types. So these are the ones like Apache, like Java that Dan was showing, that follow these standard patterns that have the certain tags on them. We have IDE, as we actually have a few of the IDE plugins. I believe we have Atom and we have Sublime Text as plugins that we own. And these are just so that we're not enforcing some of the more cookbook standard items on them. Then we have Terraform, because we have a lot of Terraform repositories, and under which will just allow us to totally customize it however we want. The purpose of the first 3 is we have a system of standardized files that rely upon certain topics. We'll go into that later as to what that is if we get time today, but there is a reason behind it for some of our automation. Now,
so I guess the first thing to do is go into main maybe, and it's just one module we loop over, isn't it? So if you have not used Terraform, I think it's Terraform 15's module looping.
It's Terraform 15, but let's just call it Terraform 1 now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's been available for a few months, but it's Terraform 0.15 and above. So if you're not using Terraform 1.0, just go try and get there as soon as possible. Some really nice stuff in it. But for every repo in our JSON, which I'll show you in a second, we just create a new repo for it, and then we pass in all the values, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
And this is the JSON here. So we just name of the cookbook, and then name of the repo, and the repo type.
I would say we may one day default it to just being cookbook, but
yeah, probably.
I thought I'd start off more explicit so it's not a surprise to people.
I will probably do it one day, but I've got a million and one other things to go and do. So as you'll see here, we've got quite a few cookbooks. And then
if you look on line 22 there, we say, hey, on this one, there's some additional things that we want. So Arc is a cookbook that has Linux, Windows, and Mac testing. So we want to check that the Windows and Mac testing is running on top of the Windows. We use a default term of integration, and integration will cover the main test. So it's Linux, or if it's a Windows cookbook, it's Windows, or if it's Mac, it's Mac. But if we've got multiple, we have integration hyphen the additional OSs with integration just being Linux, because I like Linux and it just saves me headache.
Yeah, exactly. I think you'll see like most of them. That's interesting. Did not realize we had extra status checks for HA proxy, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, we have a few very bespoke tests over there, so they're always fun to have.
And Java's got a macOS test suite again, so it'll just be macOS and then the default Linux integration test. And then when we get Windows, we'll add that again, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's kind of...
So if we look at Language Chef here, so this is one of our IDEs. So I think this is where we've been a bit clever. So we've given the users a few extra APIs to override certain things. So we don't know what the default homepage is. We can't compute that ahead of time. So please override it. Here's the overridden. The description, what's the repository about? Well, let's override that. And let's set some additional topics. To me, this JSON file needs to be something, when you look at it, you can instantly understand what's happening. And I don't want people to be surprised. But I also don't want to expose every single setting possible to the user, because all we're then doing is abstracting Terraform into JSON, which I don't think actually adds much value. We would have just written it in Terraform directly if that was the case.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, here we go. Here's our other, might be our only other repo type, which is just where we keep all of our issues that don't belong to any repository. We've got to track org level stuff in meta, which is things about Sous-Chefs belonging meta. And yeah, that might be the only other one.
There's also repo management that will be another one, but
there we go.
They're just repo management is where we store a pile of scripts and some standardized items. We're not going to go too far into that.
No, and if you want a bit more a bit more of a look under the hood, modules repository main is where all the gumph is. So yeah, worth a quick look in there. And some nice little things that we do, default license templates and that kind of stuff. So, but actually, I'll go back a second. There is label. Is it labels? Do we have
topics?
Default labels or topics? Thank you.
Because labels have a different word in every system.
Yes. So topics is part of a local. So we do some interesting stuff for topics. But based on what kind of repo it is, we do a couple of things.
I think the first thing to talk through, Dan, is what are sort of line 57, 58, and 59. Because if you don't know Terraform, and being honest, some of the limitations it has in this context, these look a bit weird and what's going on. So do you want to cover that?
Yeah, so they're all ternary operators. So if the repo type, let's start with 57. If repo type equals cookbook, then we add, can I go right a little bit? Then we do the things on the left. If it's not a cookbook, we add a blank array, basically, or blank array. So on the left hand side, we say if it's a chef cookbook or a cookbook, we add chef button cookbook, and chef resource, because we basically only write custom resources, and then we replace the local supermarket name. So, and we also add the cookbook name to the list of it. So if I jump over here back to Java, all these things eventually get added. So the topics are here, and this is the supermarket name. You see the word Java here.
The reason that we replace any underscores with hyphens is simply because underscores are not supported in topics.
In topics, yeah.
That's it. We would like to keep it identical, but we're stuck with what the options are.
So there's a nice sort of string replace function there, and then we also replace dots. We will also remove any dots in the name as well. So if there's a dot in it, we just get rid of it. We found a couple of places where we've got dots in our names, our repo names. So we just get rid of it and get out of here, and that saves us. And then we also add Hacktoberfest. And you'll see this same kind of pattern all over the place. So ID does the same thing. We add ID and also the name of the repo. Terraform, we add Terraform, and then also the name of the repo to the topics. And then for additional topics, if we set additional topics, aka if additional topics is not null, then we add them. Otherwise, we just leave them as they are. And then topics eventually does a bunch of this stuff. So we take all of them, all the chef topics, the ID topics, the Terraform topics, and the additional topics, and we compact them. So we make them one array, and then we concatenate them. So we add all the arrays together, and then we just hang on. Let's start that again, actually, because it's inside to outside. So we concatenate all the arrays together, and then we compact them to make sure they're actually one array. And then once they're all an array, if we end up with more than one topic is the same, we just get rid of the duplicates, basically, which we just use the distinct function.
I think to highlight, compact is there to remove any blanks, because we've got blank.
That's what it was.
That's it.
because it removes these for us.
Yeah. I think the other thing to point out that we're doing on line 60, so there's, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail, I think, because it's quite an interesting one, is we're using an experimental part of Terraform, which enables optional attributes within an object. So we'll touch on that in a bit, but that's why we've got a null potentially coming through, because this doesn't exist. It's never been set.
Exactly. And there's a bunch of other kind of possibly really, really interesting things. We may, if we feel like it and we're feeling fruity, I guess, we may actually have this as its own separate module. If people find this module interesting and say, actually, I want to reuse this to create my chef repos, because actually this does a bunch of work for us. Get in contact with us. We can make this a Terraform module on the marketplace, and you can source it that way. And we can publish this quite quickly. If anyone is interested in this Terraform module, we're happy to publish this. We're not precious about it. We just haven't published it at the moment. I say we. I've got my Sous-Chef hat on at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's important to note Dan is a long-standing member of Sous-Chefs as well.
Yes. So I think that probably covers most of the Terraform, doesn't it?
I think it'd be nice though if you open up provider and variables, because this is where we can just show off that optional part. So
this is the experiment.
Line 4 is that experiment. So basically, if we go into the variables, I think it will become clearer. So when we're setting things, we want these overrides, but we don't always want them to be set. We want a nice, clean JSON file. This allowed us to do it because we can say, hey, this isn't needed to be set anymore. So you could always make a standard variable optional, but you couldn't make something inside an object optional. And this is where this experimental comes into play. And personally, I found it really useful because it just made it so that I can clean up this API really easily. We are obviously waiting for this to be merged into core and made no longer an experiment, but it looks like quite a stable system now. Having seen how many people are using it, I don't think that we'll see many changes. And our use case for it is if it's optional, it's going to come through as null or empty string. So it's not a huge surprise to us.
It's pretty nice. That probably covers it. Let me just stop screen sharing for a second. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I think that module. There's a couple of other modules that you've got in Sous-Chefs that do a couple of other setup-y stuff, and the webhooks, the dreaded webhooks that add webhooks to absolutely everything.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
It's kind of similar to the repository ones, so it's probably not worth looking into.
It does trigger off of the repository one finishing because we use Terraform Cloud. That allows us to do a repository to do a trigger. The thing I will state on those triggered ones is it triggers based upon the fact that another Terraform Cloud workspace has finished. Any triggered workspace off of another workspace can never auto-apply. It needs a manual person to go in and say, yes, this is sensible. For us, it's fine. We're not going to be adding repositories daily, I hope. I think we've got most now, but I'll be proved wrong in the next year.
Oh, I really hope so, because the current sets need maintaining.
Yeah. I said the similar thing last year, and then people decided to prove me wrong, so we'll wait and see. The other thing we do have, we have a batch system that runs inside Kubernetes. And the key thing for us is that's what we call our standard file system. So we have a number of files that we consider important, but you think about things as a developer, Dan. You want to see the files locally. You want to be able to get the same feel as the CI system. I have a personal dislike of magic files that only turn up when the CI runs. So maybe let's pretend our markdown lint config was a magic file that's just going to turn up when CI runs. So when you run it locally, it fails, but when it runs in the CI pipeline, it's passing, and you don't know why. Or the opposite way round is even worse. our standard files about delivering all of these files to every single repository. And if they change in one place, it will issue a PR over to change it back, at which point we'll have a conversation, because maybe the change that you've made to one repository is something we really like and we want to roll out everywhere. I mean, what are some of the things we've rolled out in recent times? Overcommit, mvarc, as simple ones that have really helped a lot of people.
Oh, delivery. So actually, let me just share
Yes.
this there. That was a fun one. So we go to our repo management repo. So if we go into the standard files folder and then the cookbook one. So we mentioned that we label each of the repos with cookbook ID or Terraform. Surprise, surprise, there's a folder for each of the standard files for each of those. And then if you're a cookbook, you should have a delivery with a project tunnel that looks like this. So if you run chef exec delivery local all, it will run all of this every single time, and it's the same everywhere.
I think we should also touch on what delivery is. We're not using delivery as it was originally intended. We're using delivery because I'm too lazy to remember all of the commands in here, and I am forever getting the rspec command wrong. But for some reason, I've memorized a longer command perfectly.
And I think this is nice though, because we don't need the power of rspec most of the time as Sous-Chefs. We just need to usually run like rspec/spec or cook style with the display cop names. Nothing particularly fancy. We just kind of need to run a command line thing. So the nice thing is here, if we just run chef exec, so you always run the things that are in the chef folder, delivery local, so the local mode of delivery, and then unit or lint, it will run the thing that's underneath lint and unit, or all, it will just run all of them. But that's kind of the same thing as if I was going to run rspec and then pass it an rspec tasks name if you're used to that, or make and then one of the make tasks there. This lets us just, it's just a plain old TOML file, which is super nice to deal with. And if you don't want to do it this way with the standard files, you can also source it from a raw GitHub URL, which is really nice. So if you have a TOML file on the internet somewhere that you can read, it will just read that TOML file. We've kind of gone away from that because we end up copying or /pasting this file into every single repo that we own. So we just, we'll have project.toml local in every repo, which is nice.
There's also the fun of people who are behind proxy servers and maybe aren't able to run delivery simply because they can't get to the file because for some reason their company's not allowing it. Well, this gets around that. So that's nice.
And so this is one we've recently-ish changed. So I quite like having, if I'm doing YAML with braces, I quite like a space in between so I can actually read what's in the braces because, but it allows us to have no braces, no spaces or some spaces. My editor likes spaces as well, and I think I agree with my editor the fact that it makes it more readable. So this rule basically allows me to write. Let me just see if Java cookbook.
I think you're sharing a different window at the moment.
I'm just going to try and find it before I reshare my thing.
But yeah, again, this is about us though. As a developer, I've got a consistent feeling across every repository I'm working in because there's not a different setting in one repo as opposed to another. But also that if I am brand new, what I run locally works the same. Consistency is key to me. I don't, as a developer, want to have to read through tons of documentation to do something that the tool just does.
Exactly. So here we go. So driver name exec. So rather than having driver and then a new line name exec, I can just have it in one line. Same thing with transport. We've only got one option there, so it just kind of saves a bit of space.
And
the default linting suggests you put it in that line, but I guess that the whole point here was to say we have a standard. We want it across all our repositories. I don't care what you think. Like if you actually suddenly think that you want 2 spaces everywhere, right? let's make that a standard across the entirety of the organization, and that is an organization-wide policy. Then we just do that there. So it's quite nice.
And for those wondering what Dan was just sharing, that was a kitchen file that was using the inheritance, which I'm sure there'll be a webinar on one day, because not too many people are aware of all the inheritance features within Test Kitchen. I know.
We might even do a stream on it one day.
Yeah.
We'd probably do a stream on it. We may do, actually, we're almost certain to do a stream on the inheritance feature, because there's a nice quick snippet thing there. We can go over kitchen inheritance in another stream. I think that pretty much covers it, and it's 5 to 5, so, or 5 to 5, or 5 to beer o'clock our time, isn't it? So
it's always a good time of day.
That's brilliant. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask them now in one of the chats or in Sous-Chefs on the community Slack, and we will happily answer them.
I guess that's a good point as well. If you want to reach out and help out with Sous-Chefs, on the community Slack is the Sous-Chefs channel, Sous-Chefs. The other thing is just go on GitHub, fork the repository, issue your PR. Think of it this way. I know how many times I've worked in companies that have been doing great work with a cookbook, and they were really fortunate to me, and they'd say, hey, if it doesn't require and give us a competitive advantage, let's share it, let's open source it. So if you've got resources, if you've got functionality you think that would be fair for your company to share upwards, PR them in. I'm sure other people have either written the same resources or would look to write the same thing. And we're a community, let's work together.
Yeah. Cool. It doesn't look like we've got any new and super interested people, so I'm going to call time on our little babble.
Thanks for having me as always, Dan.
Yeah, it's been great to have you on. I might drag you on again at some point in the next month or two, maybe after the talk. If we've got any interesting questions in our talk at ChefConf, then we'll probably do a little stream on it, maybe to see if we can get more eyeballs on it. But again, I'm gonna do my parting shot. As is, if you haven't already registered for ChefConf, the link is below. And likewise, we are at Chef on Twitter, which is nice and simple, which is good. And if you want to join us on the community Slack, the link is also below, which is quite nice. Again, if you've got any questions or any feedback, you can go to the DevRel channel on community Slack, and we are really happy to have some feedback. But likewise, we are going to shoot for the day. Thank you very much for joining us.